Hey, everybody, welcome to the Community Challenge. Got the whole crew here today because I thought we could talk a little bit about marriage and this vow. We're talking about vows right now, and the vow we talked about this last weekend as a church was the vow of priority and putting things in priority. And so since we're all married, I thought, man, this would be a good conversation to have around some of the things we heard and some of the things that's been going on in our own marriages and some of the things God's been showing us. And so one of the things that we saw that was just, we've been joking around it, but it's not funny in the least, is these statistics that we heard from this one book that from Holly Hine, I believe, that Craig brought up in the message. One of those I remember was 70% of men, 60% of women that are married has had an affair.
Yeah.
Which is
That's unbelievable.
Wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely wrong.
And it's like, and that stat isn't like outside the church stats.
Yeah.
Like that's people, that's marriages in general.
You know, and the other one was every 10 to 13 seconds, you know, a couple is experiencing a divorce, is going through a divorce.
Yeah, another one's going through it. Yeah.
And
Well, and that just has so many ramifications. You know, that's the dropping the big pebble in the pond. It affects, you know, kids, of course, but generations and parents and grandparents. And I mean, you know, who out there has not been affected in some way by divorce?
Yeah. I mean, I was a youth pastor for a number of years, and there's multiple divorces and kids dealing with that issue consistently, and it's tears people apart literally, and kids are hurting through the midst of that. So hearing those stats just makes your whole spirit fall. It's like, wow, there's that much going on. And there's probably plenty of people out who have experienced it like significantly. Or
with those numbers, and that's where the respect factor comes in. So there's people watching it that have experienced it, and hope some have experienced healing. I mean, I know some people personally that have went through those stats, whether it's an affair or the divorce. And so we're talking to a majority of people. That's what it is. And so figuring out how, like, it's sort of what do we do? Because when you ask that question, I've you know, somewhere in my immediate family, I've experienced divorce in many, you know, places in a relationship in my family. And so just thinking through that, it becomes a little overwhelming. But we talked about something else, and I think, you know, you have a stat on this. We're going to share it a little bit later. We're going to save it, but they're about what we can do. How can we, one of the problems is our priorities. A lot of times we think to make our wives, in our case, for you, your spouse, whoever that would be, make them the priority so that you can have a better marriage. And that's just not the case. That's not how God intended it to be, but that God would be the number one. When people are saying, man, I'm looking for my one, well, you can find your one. That's God. And second, you know, would be your spouse. And then third, maybe your kids, and going on down the line if you're going to value that out. But number one would be God.
I liked how Craig mentioned, though, too, a lot of people, and I've noticed this in our marriage at times, that your kids can very easily start to become your one. And you're working with your kids and stuff, and you realize, wow, it's been a day or two or three. I don't feel like I've even had a face-to-face conversation with my wife. I'm like, man, like sometimes we allow so many different things to kind of creep in there to take over our priority. And that's what was so awesome about this message, was the valid priority of keeping God at number one and keeping your spouse at number two, and keeping keeping that perspective consistent.
Yeah. And part of the challenge while we're still discussing this is a really practical and simple thing, to be honest. But we even talked about how it's weird how it can be sort of a difficult thing.
Yeah.
But to take your spouse and to pray with them. So we're doing a 7-day prayer challenge where we just, the whole church, and I challenge you to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Every day for just 7 days, pray with your spouse. If you're single, you know, pray for your spouse that you haven't met yet, maybe, or maybe you have. But I mean, use that as a time to say, you know, to pray that God would be the focus, and that would be the idea of the prayer. Me and Christy did this the other night, and it was funny how we've been married for 13 years, prayed together, you know, before, but we don't do it every, you know, 7 days a week, and so to do that was like we sort of had to make the decision. And then when we did, I just stopped and was like, man, like just hearing her perspective and her speak to God with the idea of, God, we want you to be first, you know, each of us individually as a family was a pretty cool deal.
Yeah, and it sounds easy when they say just, you know, pray with your spouse for 7 days. Like, oh, we'll make time for that. That won't be a big deal. But I guarantee you'll have to fight for that time. Like, and it will be. It's funny because it's your spouse, and but to pray with them doesn't sound like it would be difficult. But it is actually kind of awkward, and it's kind of hard at first because you're not used to making that time for each other.
Yeah, Kathy and I mean, we had to talk about it last night to make sure that it was going to happen this morning. You know, it took some planning.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, as far as an incentive to do it, that you know, all those statistics.
Here it is.
You turn it the other way. Less than 1% of couples that pray together get divorced.
Yeah.
I mean, just staggering. I mean, you know, if you want to reverse a trend, man, start praying with your spouse on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I've always said, you know, that I proclaim definitely hopefully with my actions as well, but with my words is that, man, I'm so passionate about marriage. I believe it's a picture of our relationship with Christ, and to see a stat like that makes, and I hope it does others, it is overwhelming, but to know that, man, we can do something about it. We can change the landscape, not only for us, but for, like you said, generations. This is a relationship that if you were the enemy and you were going to go against something that was most important, makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
And
so-
you think about, you know, as far as we're connected to you because of the church, but the priority that God puts on the family, you know, I mean, and so, you know, some of you out there are single, and so I hope this is, you know, preparedness action. But, man, God just places such a priority on the family, and that was originally his intent for how things were going to go down, you know?
Yeah. So there it is. That's simply what we're talking about. You want to check out, we're going to be talking about some more vows in the next few weeks at lifechurch.tv. But that's one priority, making God number one. And one way you can do that, single or married, is to commit to 7 days of prayer, of focusing on him. So if you have a spouse, get with them, pray with them one time for each day for 7 days, and just see what God will do.